everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Seed Speaks. Seed Speaks is a video series brought to you by Seed World Group. I'm Mark Zinkowitz, I'm an editor with Seed World Group, and this month we're talking about the politics of seed. I'm joined today by two people who are definitely qualified to talk about politics. One is an elected official in federal Canadian politics, and the other is running for political office in a provincial election here in Manitoba, Canada. First of all, James Bezan is the Conservative Member of Parliament in the Manitoba riding of Selkirk-Interlake Eastman. James has been elected 7 times since 2004. Over the course of his parliamentary career, he's chaired the House of Commons standing committees for agriculture and agri-food, environment, and national defense. James lives on a farm, and he's also worked in the livestock industry. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me on the show, Mark.
Well, thanks for taking the time. Jeff Bereza is no stranger to those of us in the seed industry. During his time at Sears Global Seeds, he served as Director of Sales and Marketing, helping grow the business to become a leading independent soybean company across Western Canada. Most recently, Jeff was National Director of Sales for Nexus BioAg. He recently retired from that position and is now running as the Progressive Conservative candidate in the Manitoba constituency of Portage la Prairie in the provincial election that is taking place as we speak. Thank you for your time, Jeff. I know it's a super busy time for you being on the campaign trail, so I appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks so much, Mark. Anytime I get a chance to talk about agriculture is a good day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's why I wanted, both of you to be on specifically because you've both been heavily involved in agriculture. As I said, James, you've worked in livestock, you live on a farm. Jeff, you've been involved in the seed industry for many years. And I kind of want to start there. I want to set the stage today and ask each of you to sort of remove your political hat for a second, because in addition to being involved in politics, like I say, you've both lived and breathed agriculture for a long time. Starting with James, as someone who's worked in livestock, lives on a farm, and what for you, what do you feel is the most pressing issue facing those of us in agriculture at the moment?
Well, I believe, Mark, that the issues around competitiveness on the world stage, since so much of what we grow is exported, the issues around how expensive it is getting in Canada to produce our food stocks, whether it's livestock, grains, oil seeds, dairy, all the input costs continue to rise. And it's not just happening around the world, but we seem to be at a competitive disadvantage, especially to our major competitors like the United States, like Australia, like some of the South American countries like Argentina and Brazil. So, I think that is an issue. There's still the issue around market access for so many of our commodities. And then, if you really want to take it down to the grassroots, is making sure that agriculture is properly understood by those that don't have any background in it. I see it all the time, since I was first elected back in 2004. Canadians don't understand where their food comes from. What they look at today's modern family farm, they call them corporate farms, but they're still a family operation. They're just bigger and better at what they do. And we need to continue to tell that story. Some of the commodity groups are very good at telling that story on social media, telling that story in advertising, but there's still a lot of work to do so that Canadians understand how important agriculture is to our economy, how important agriculture is to their way of life, and to how healthy and wholesome our food is here in Canada.
Jeff, having been involved in the seed industry specifically for so many years, what in your view is the biggest challenge our industry is facing right now?
I think, Mark, there's a number of challenges here, and I would absolutely agree with what James has said there as well too. We're also like any other business that's out there too. We're also running into labor issues with having people land prices. Land prices keep skyrocketing. Equipment prices, when we hear the price of equipment. But just to echo as well too on what James has said too is a lot of people think that a loaf of bread comes from a Safeway or a Panko's food center here in Portage la Prairie or Portage Supermarket. And it doesn't. It comes from very smart individuals who I believe are the best at sustainability out there. And one of I would say the largest thing that faces our growers right now in the seed business is the impact that the nitrogen reduction on emissions could have. With the talk of a 30% decrease in nitrogen emissions, our farmers, our growers are the best stewards of our land out there. They don't put on extra nitrogen or extra phosphate or extra products that they might not need because their margins are so short, like James said, in the world marketplace. If we start looking at cutting emissions by 30% on nitrogen, with the way and how productive Canadian agriculture is to the world out there, and there's so many people, and the world population continues to grow, and Canada is such a huge part of that, is we don't want anybody to starve out there. But in the current conditions that are being imposed on some, or talked about being imposed on a lot of our growers out there, it will cause us to lose production and productivity in our land today.
Now, you both hit on something really important, and that's the public perception of agriculture. Often people who aren't involved in agriculture are getting very strong messages about agriculture from all kinds of different sources. Some of them are good sources, some of them are maybe not so good sources. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, was how people can communicate better with people in the political realm. We often talk about how our elected officials can help us, what we can get from them. But I want to sort of flip that around and give our viewers some strategies for how they can be helpful to people like you. How I could be helpful to someone like James who's in office. How I can be helpful to someone like you, Jeff, who's on the campaign trail, and to make sure I'm communicating my views effectively. Now, James, you used to serve as chair of the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food, so you relied on feedback from the public to be able to do your job effectively in that role. What's the best way that those of us in the agriculture industry and beyond can let people like you know what we need in terms of making good policy? Is there a certain communication method or a way of communicating that's most effective, that's most constructive, and why?
There's going to be less and less farmers elected into office. So I'm glad to see, people with agriculture backgrounds like Jeff running, because we just don't have enough people that have that, hands in the dirt experience of understanding how agriculture takes place. And so there's a lot to do on that basic education. And this is the thing that I find in talking to my colleagues in House Commons from all parties, is most of them don't understand how agriculture works. They don't understand anything around livestock production. They don't understand anything around crop production. They think that, as Jeff was alluding to, the reduction of nitrogen fertilizer by 30% is a great idea, not realizing that a 30% reduction in fertilizer use will almost completely correlate over to a 30% reduction in overall yield of those crops. And that will impact the profitability of our farms. And, a number of years ago, when I was chair of the Agriculture Committee, one of the big issues out there was buy local, and everybody's pushing buy local. And of course, with all the farming that we have here out in the prairies, buy local only goes so far because we have a limited population base. And so we need to export. We need to move interprovincially as well as internationally. And the idea behind buy local to me was counterintuitive and counterproductive to the overall scheme of making sure our rural communities are healthy, that our farms are productive and profitable, and that they can support the community infrastructure that we have in our rural towns and cities right across the country. So that is something that we have to continue to fight and work towards. So my recommendation, whenever I have a farm organization walk in, and even though I've spent the last, better part of the last 12 years working on national defense, I always meet with all the agriculture commodity groups when they come up on the hill, because it's something I'm passionate about. I still, as you mentioned, Mark, still on the farm. I'm not, same risk exposure I used to have. I'm just doing some custom grazing these days. But my family are our family of farmers and ranchers, and we the better part of my riding are farmers and ranchers, and so we need to continue to support them. But coming in and talking to somebody like me that understands the issues is important, so we can push that agenda, at caucus and at cabinet and do it across party lines. But it's also incredibly important for grassroots farmers to get in front of their members of parliament, the members of the legislative assembly, the candidates in this upcoming election. For those that don't have agriculture backgrounds, educate them. Tell them what's happening on the farm so that they can understand it. And when they get into office or are currently in office, that they have a better appreciation of the debate that's taking place around some of these policies and regulations that are coming into play. And all you have to do is look at some of these regulations, like Jeff already mentioned, that the Liberals are brought forward on reducing nitrogen fertilizer by 30%, trying to get down to a net zero standpoint. All laudable goals, but are they practical? And are they actually in the end going to make us less food secure as a nation, and definitely not being able to feed the world as we always like to look at ourselves upon that as prairie farmers. We feed the world, and we want to continue to do that. But if government gets in the way, that's going to be very, very difficult to do.
Now, Jeff, you've been on the campaign trail for just over a week now since the election was called. What's your advice to those of us, in the seed industry and beyond, for how we can most effectively get our message across to people like you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. And, James talked about it a fair bit there. But one of the things that I have to rely on my background here is Ian Wishart, who was the president of the Keystone Agricultural Producers in Manitoba here, I'm taking over his position. And Ian has been a tremendous help to me throughout my career. And moving forward, Jill Verway being the president of CAP now. So again, I think it's important for our farmers to be involved with these organizations that meet regularly with political people like myself and James. The other thing too is I believe this last 27 years that I've spent in the agriculture business, it has brought me to this point of where I am today. It's taught me lots about agriculture, but it's also taught me a lot about the urban population too. And I think we as politicians, we as growers, need to share more on what we do and how we do feed the world out there. Your voice is always heard out there, or should be heard. I want to be an advocate for the agriculture business, not just in the Portage la Prairie riding, but throughout Manitoba. And one of the things that we run into is some of the urban population, understanding where that our food comes from and how it's grown. And the issue that we run into with this nitrogen emission reduction could be absolutely not just detrimental to Manitoba. This is going to be detrimental to the world. Again, I can't stress it enough that our growers are stewards of the land. They are the best people to know what the land is needing, what it's using. They're out there doing soil testing and tissue testing to make sure that they're putting into those plants and growing the best crops that there is out there. You mentioned before about Kelvin Pachura being on your last show as well too. Kelvin is part of a soybean company that produces certified seed. Again, to the growers out there, go and get the best possible products that you can get out there, whether it be seed products, agrochemical, but make sure you're getting good, proper advice on that as well too. And to the people that aren't in the farming business, but that eat that are fed by the farmers out there, know that they are the best producers, know that they are the best ones to know about their land out there, and know that they want to do the right thing out there. Canada is known as especially Western Canada here, we are the breadbasket of the world. And we have so many opportunities here. I look in my own constituency here with Roquette having the largest pea protein manufacturing facility in Canada right now. Again, that leads to a lot of other things that can happen as well too. The soybean production has just ramped up some more and more, almost on a yearly basis out here too. Our canola production, and again, these people that are producing the seed and that are looking to give our growers out there a better opportunity to be able to grow a better high quality crop out there. So again, as growers, make sure that you're coming to us as politicians. And again, what I've learned from the agriculture business too is the agriculture business really is a belly to belly business out there. We need to talk to each other. We need to be, as politicians as well, involved in some of these shows and any chance that we have the opportunity to be around growers, because they are our greatest asset out there.
Before we take an audience question and log off for the day, James, what's the most we've been talking a lot about, misperceptions, misunderstandings that people have about agriculture. And James, what's the biggest misunderstanding about federal politics? What's the biggest misunderstanding, misperception that people have about what you do, and what's the reality of it?
Well, I think maybe people don't understand how thin our time is spread from dealing with our constituency issues and advocating for our people in our own ridings who are having difficulty with the federal government. And it's everything from farm programs to, in our riding with Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipeg, it's commercial fishing issues. It's to seniors issues, dealing with OAS, CPP. We deal with immigration. We have a plethora of issues that we deal with on a federal level. And of course, I've always been a strong advocate for farming. And I've also been a very, very strong advocate for the Canadian Armed Forces and veterans. And so that's kind of where I specialize in, but I still have to know all this other stuff and really depend upon my great staff. It's a team effort to be able to deal with all that. And at the same time, we're doing all of that constituency work. We have our roll up in Parliament, and we go back into session on Monday. And, essentially I'm going to be gone Sunday till Friday night to make sure I'm in Ottawa for our sitting days, and very little time back home. And on the Saturdays that I am back in the riding, in addition to trying to, make sure I'm spending some family time, I will also be doing, community events to ensure that I'm connected with our constituency. So, I think people don't always appreciate, that first and foremost, we are members of Parliament. We're expected to be in Parliament. We have to be in Ottawa and participating in those debates. And secondly, is the amount of work that we do at the riding level. The other thing is that we're incredibly lucky in Manitoba from an agriculture standpoint that, our rural members of Parliament that we have right now are almost all of us come from agriculture backgrounds. Ted Falk, although his main business is construction, he started off as a hog farmer. We got to remember that Dan Mazur was president of the Keystone Ag Producers. Larry McGuire was vice president of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers, and Brandon Leslie, just elected in Portage Lisgar, in addition to being a farm kid from Portage, also worked for CropLife Canada. So he has that broad perspective in his education, his agriculture, as is mine and Dan's and Larry's. So we're lucky, but that's not necessarily the case across the board. And I keep telling farm organizations and farmers in general, don't just call me. Make sure you also call those that don't have that connection to farming. So, reach out to our Winnipeg MPs, especially the Liberals that are currently the government. hopefully for not much longer. But anyway, make sure they understand when they're bringing forward these regulations and policies, everything from fertilizer use to free trade agreements to livestock hauling regulations, which have also been detrimental to the overall health and safety of our livestock, as well as our drivers, and making sure animals get into feedlots in the fall run right now in a timely manner. All those things have consequences, and we need to educate them. And often when we try to talk to them as farmers in politics, they see us talking to them through that partisan lens. And that's where the grassroots, the different member organizations of CAP and all the different commodity groups have that opportunity and ability to penetrate past the partisanship and do that education and public awareness that needs to happen with legislators at both the federal and provincial level.
Jeff, how about you? What's the biggest misunderstanding people have about provincial politics, and what's the reality of it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. And I think one of the biggest issues out there is education. One of the things that I see out there, and I've seen over my 27 years out there, is we have to realize that there's more urban voters than there are rural voters in most places out there. So we can all do ourselves a service here by helping the urban voters understand about agriculture. So the open agriculture days that that happen in different provinces across Western Canada here, I think is a great idea. I think as politicians, we can help to also move those forward as well too, so that people help to understand the agriculture business as well. Know that there's a lot of talk about Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipeg about the farmers with their fertilizer or so-called over fertilizing are polluting the lakes. And again, like I said, they are stewards of this land. They are not using more fertilizer than what they need or any other products that are out there. So again, I would suggest, like James did too, is make sure you're talking to your organizations. Make sure we as rural MPs and MLAs are talking to people in both the urban centers and the rural areas too, to educate them on how important agriculture really is to the Canadian economy, but also of what we produce and what the Canadians, again, us being a giving country out there, what we are actually supporting throughout the world here. And as this population continues to grow, we will need to grow more food in order to feed our population. I'm excited about being part of that. And again, the other thing too is for those that are listening that might be from urban areas, don't forget to thank a farmer out there for what they're doing. It's big business now. It's multi-million dollar business, but most of them are still being run by families out there. We talk about corporate farms and that, but a corporate farm, it can be a family farm that's incorporated out there. And again, learn from what we can, and we can do a better job as politicians as well too, of letting everybody know how valuable farmers are to us.
Before we finish off for the day, I'm just going to take a quick audience question in regards to working with other counterparts. Specifically for you, James, how have you worked with international counterparts to share the concerns, the issues of your constituents in regards to agriculture? Does an instance come to mind, James? Because as we've noted already, agriculture is a global business. And can you think of one instance, James, where you've sort of had the opportunity to sort of bring the Canadian, the Manitoban agricultural experience to an international counterpart?
Yeah, I've got to do it a couple of times. One is as chair of the Agriculture Committee back during the days of border closures to the beef industry over BSE, advocating directly with Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, including a trip to Taiwan, talking directly to the Taiwanese president at the time to reopen borders. Same thing when I was chair of the Environment Committee, actually going to Europe and talking about the environment, but also putting that agricultural lens on it, talking to parliamentarians from across the European Union and elsewhere for that matter, non-EU countries as well, as to the importance of agriculture and Canadian agriculture to their own food security. And as we talk about competitiveness, we talk about the need for trade. And we also talk about, as Jeff said, making sure we tell consumers and voters to thank a farmer. We've got to always remember everything's field to fork. And I think people are starting to understand how policies that are made both federally and provincially are having a major impact. And all you have to do is look at the current carbon tax debate that's happening on how the carbon tax is impacting, the cost of production at the farm gate, the cost of transportation, which ultimately results in higher food prices and higher food prices here than what is being experienced in other places around the world that don't have a carbon tax. So, those are the types of things that are starting to resonate, I think, with the public at large. And it's up to us as politicians to do a better job of explaining how decisions being made by our governments are impacting us here at home and our ability to trade around the world.
I'll give you the last word, Jeff. How about you? If you had a chance to work with, international counterparts, maybe people in other provinces who are also running for office in order to sort of spread that message?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. I have had an opportunity to deal with the Ukrainian coalition or a Ukrainian group that came to Canada a couple of years ago to understand about our agriculture business as well. And again, to see the awe from them of what we deal with here in Canada, and how lucky we are to be Canadians in agriculture and just to be Canadians in general. Dealing with different provincial jurisdictions as well too. Again, a lot of my career was in the soybean business, and again, we have opportunities now where we never had 20 years ago, where we're able to grow soybeans in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, where Ontario was the only province at that time, and Quebec somewhat, that were growing soybeans. So again, we have to learn to educate better. But I think the one thing that we need to continue to do, like James said, it's farm to fork out there, and our growers are doing this not as a business, but it's a livelihood for them. It's something, a lot of these farms have been passed down from generation to generation, and they want to continue to feed the world.
Thank you, Jeff.
Mark,
James.
can I just jump in here, because
Sure.
I omitted that. I just got back from Ukraine about 2 weeks ago. And even though I was there on national defense business, in all the meetings I had, including meetings with the Office of the President, with the Department of Defense, and with parliamentary colleagues in both the RADA, their Defense Committee, and their Foreign Affairs Committee, we talked about not just Canada's support for Ukraine and how we must continue to support Ukraine from a military standpoint, but I also talked about the issue that Canada can help in rebuilding infrastructure to help get their commodities to market as well, and to help with their overall production. And the whole issue of food security, again, is paramount to the discussion of the Russian invasion and Putin's genocide that he's trying to commit right now in Ukraine. So, all these things often interlink. And I think it's important that is part of the picture when we are talking to constituents and consumers. The importance of agriculture as the very basis of our security as a nation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a human business, all over the world. It's, as Jeff pointed out, even if it's a so-called corporate farm, I mean, it's almost always a family farm that has been incorporated. And so it's really important to get that across. So, no, thank you to both of you for spending time with me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.
You
Good
guys
luck,
have a
Jeff,
great
out
day.
there on the campaign trail. And I'm going out to door knock right now with our ag minister, Derek Johnson. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks, James.
Have fun, guys. And thank you to our audience for spending your lunch hour with us. That's all the time we have today. Excuse me. Tune in next week when Ashley Robinson tackles the topic of the brown bagging of seed. This is Mark Zinkowitz signing off. Have a great day, everybody.